Every September 18th, sirens go off across China to commemorate the event that precipitated the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. On this 81st anniversary of the Mukden incident, it had a very particular ring to it. Across China, protests against the Japanese government's recent purchase of long-disputed islands flourished. At one point, Tuesday, 3 state-owned Chinese ships entered the territorial waters around those islands. Why the spike in tension? National pride? The natural gas and oil that might lie beneath those waters? Or rather, issues that pertain to what's going on dry land. Tension rising weeks before China's tip to renew its top leadership for the first time in a decade. Today, in the France 24 debate, we're looking at China and Japan in dangerous waters. And with us to talk about it, Lucy Liu, she's the Paris correspondent for Phoenix TV. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Welcome back as well to Jean-François Di of the Asia Center.
Good evening.
Joining us from Stanford University, Philip Lipsky. Thank you for being with us. And from the Washington public relations firm DCI Group, GU is with us. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook. And on Twitter, you can find us at FrancoisF24. Let's begin, if you will, by looking at the disputed area with you, Jean-François Di Meglio, and look at the map. How significant, if we call that map up, are those islands?
Well, the most significant point about those islands is that they enable whoever masters this territory to basically sail in or out of the arc of islands.
So it's not so much the islands, but the territorial waters around them, as we can see on that map.
Giving way to the high seas. China is, of course, open to the sea, but it's not open to the high seas. There are 2 arcs of islands. And then when you pass by those islands, you are really in high seas. So strategically speaking, it's quite important. You may argue that nowadays it's not that important to sail through, and you have all type of ways, to strike beyond those places. You can say also that you can have submarines and you can be stealth and so on, but it's quite significant to be able to sail through. That's one point. The other point is natural resources, as you mentioned. Those islands are supposed to be rich in terms of fishing. They are supposed to be rich in terms of natural resources as well. So it's important. But probably the issue is not there. Probably it's an issue of national pride. And it's an issue where, obviously, once again, Japan and China have some issues and some reasons to.
And you mentioned national pride. There certainly was a lot of it in the voice of the spokesperson for the foreign ministry. Here's what he had to say following the events of today.
Today is the anniversary of September 18th. China is no longer a victim of bullying. China will not see its territories violated. The Japanese purchase of the islands will not and cannot be allowed.
Pretty strong words there, Lucy Liu. How far is this all going to go?
Well, first of all, most of the Chinese they were surprised that they heard the news that the Japanese, they are trying to purchasing those islands, 3 of the 5, and for the Chinese, those islands called Diaoyu Dao belongs to China, as well as the fact of Japanese had invented China with all those killings. Those things were written in the book, in the history book. But I think in Japan, there's another version. So during today, it's the 81st anniversary of the 18th of September. It's also this year, end of September. It's also the 40 years of anniversary of becoming a formal relationship between China and Japan. So all of a sudden, they heard that this news, which is shocking. And for all the Chinese, most of the Chinese, we can imagine that they think those things arrive in purpose for those anniversaries.
And when you hear,
you can imagine the ferocity of those Chinese who's on the streets.
when you hear Philip Lipsky, the foreign ministry spokesperson there, say China is no longer a victim of bullying, sort of a nod to the fact that perhaps the relationship between China and Japan is changing.
Certainly. I think on both sides there is a strong perception that the relationship has changed. China is now the second largest economy in the world, and the Chinese people and the Chinese leadership feel that they can be more assertive on the international scene. On the Japanese side, there is quite a bit of anxiety that Japan is losing its position within the world. So on both sides, I think there is a sense of each other that ties into this very deeply. But I think it's worth emphasizing on your earlier point about the purchase of the islands, that this was initiated in Japan by the very conservative mayor of Tokyo, Ishihara. And the Japanese government ultimately decided to purchase the islands as the Japanese government because it felt that letting this very conservative mayor of Tokyo go ahead with the purchase would actually cause relations with China to deteriorate. So the irony here is that the Japanese government was trying to handle this sensitively, but unfortunately, I think it backfired anyway.
GU in Washington, could the Japanese have handled this differently?
I think there's pretty much not much the Japanese can do short of giving up the island that would totally please the Chinese people. But I think there are certainly more ways to give the Chinese government more room to maneuver through the crisis without making a fundamental decision to either look like they're giving up part of the Chinese territory, therefore, losing a big chunk of their popularity in China, or resorting to military action, which would also fundamentally harm the Chinese economic growth.
Now, there were two kind of responses out of Japan that we've seen. First, we can hear the official reaction out of Tokyo.
Given that these are Japanese companies that also play an important role in China's economy and employment, we believe China should take a broader view and handle the issue calmly.
Reaction this Tuesday, two Japanese nationalists swimming to the largest of those three islands for some 90 minutes. The Japanese government bans all unauthorized entry to the islands. Japanese police say they were going to question the two swimmers. The biggest cheerleader, though, for Japanese nationalism, Lucy was mentioning a moment ago, the four-term governor of Tokyo, Shintaro Ishihara. It was his announced intention to buy those islands that prompted the government to nationalize them. Here's what Shintaro said last week.
It's not just Japan. We should also join forces with the other victims of China's absurd attempts at regional hegemony, such as Vietnam and the Philippines. Without that, the problem will spread across Asia. This would be at least one way to prevent this strange hegemony by China.
Philip Lipsky is the nationalist governor of Tokyo, in a way prompting the Japanese government to act.
I think one of the unfortunate dynamics of a situation like this is the voices that tend to get heard the most on both sides tend to be the most extreme. And Ishihara is a very good example of this. He in no way represents the average Japanese perspective on this. Public opinion polls show that about a majority of the Japanese people would prefer resolution of this issue through peaceful dialogue, but the media will tend to focus on extreme views like Ishihara's, and I suspect that the same is true on the Chinese side as well.
Now,
Yes.
go ahead, GU in Washington.
Yes, I believe it's the same on the Chinese side. Yes, we see most of the report on the violent protests in China these days. But if you go on to Chinese website, Chinese equivalents of Twitter and Facebook, you see the overwhelming comments on these events by the Chinese citizens are calling for calm and rational patriotism. And most people are condemning those aimless violence that even things that like attacking the Japanese embassy and Japanese businesses. I think the majority of Chinese people, they also want to solve the dispute through a peaceful manner.
GU, you say that, but like we noticed, for instance, this Tuesday, the popular search engine Baidu had on its homepage a little island with a Chinese flag on top of it. So it's not just a small minority who feels this way.
I think most of the, if you do a survey over the Chinese population and whether they think the Diaoyu Island belongs to China, I think you'll probably get a huge majority that says yes, and probably 100% of people will say yes, it's part of China. But I don't think people would say, okay, we need to take over today. We're not going to care what our neighbors are going to react to that. I think people realize it is a dispute, and people realize there are precautions to forcefully take over the sovereignty over the island. And I think has always been the sentiment in China towards a lot of its territorial disputes, and even with Taiwan. If you ask people in China, is Taiwan part of China? Everybody's going to tell you yes, it is. But if you ask them, hey, should we invade Taiwan tomorrow? Everybody would think that's ridiculous.
Jean-François Di Meglio, you're just back from
yes, I'm back from a seminar in Shanghai, where quite a few scholars were invited. Among the scholars was a quite famous Japanese scholar who spoke perfect Chinese. He had been a student there, and he was obviously very well treated. There was no reason for him to cancel his visit to the seminar we were attending, and he got lots of respect from all the other Chinese scholars. So I think what we tend to forget is that this is not a relationship between two countries which used to be in war and which would be similar to what we have in Europe, for example, where it's like black and white, or there is an evolution like we had with Germany. The way I feel it is that, of course, there is lots of benevolency towards Japanese companies, towards Japanese individuals who work in China, and that has been built throughout years. The first companies from Japan investing in China did so like 30, 35
But would you also say that the Chinese government sanctioned these protests, let them go on, and did
Absolutely.
even more?
So there is an ambivalence, and this coexists. It's not a one-way feeling, even among individuals. Deep in their heart, they are strongly nationalist. So when anything would happen, well, that would be Japan. That can be, France when something happened with Tibet 4 years ago. But also people have internationalized in their minds. Chinese people are also internationalized. So they also can be rational. So it's a strange coexistence of two types of feelings. And of course, we are always surprised that it can jump from one stage to the other. Obviously, it's not jumping like in those occasions totally spontaneously. There are things happening in China also which can justify that the eyes could be turned outwards rather than inwards.
When you say, Jean-François Di Meglio is saying that a lot of this is not spontaneous. Do you agree?
Well, actually, when I'm watching the images, I was told by some colleagues, in China that most of the people who's on the streets are actually those who had attacked the embassies, etc., in China with the eggs, Most of them, they are jobless people or youngsters. Most of the intellectuals, they were calling people to come down, to think ahead before burning the Japanese cars or attacking the embassies, etc. Well, of course, some of them be called the traders, be treated as traders by the youngsters. So, for Chinese people, the intellectual people, they were sharing the opinion that we should not, make those violence as we seeing in on the streets, because it could be out of control for both parts. And the other thing that I would like to mention is for the media parts. We've seen two nationalist Japanese were swimming to the islands. Before them, there were some 20 Chinese nationalists or patriotists. They were trying to get on the islands. They were arrested when they arrived finally by swimming by Japanese police and militaries on these islands, including two journalists
from your network.
From yeah, exactly, the Phoenix TV. Afterwards, those things get more furious of the people that they think the Chinese people, the nationalists, they were arrested on their own territories. That's the development of the story.
All right, fine. And so, in other words, that stirred up public opinion, seeing Chinese people arrested by the Japanese. Before we go to the break, there's the effect of all this on the economy. Japanese car makers, convenience stores closing Chinese factories this Tuesday to avoid clashes during the protests. Japanese citizens in China saying that they're avoiding speaking Japanese in the street. But it all shows up just how much bilateral trade there is now between these two regional rivals. It's phenomenal, up 14% in 2011. Philip Lipsky, China and Japan are more intertwined than ever.
Absolutely. And the nature of the trade is something to keep in mind. A lot of the trade between Japan and China is part of the global supply chain. So they both need each other. It's not a relationship where Japan is more dependent on China or China is more dependent on Japan. If there is a major trade or economic conflict, both sides will suffer quite deeply. And the world economy is not in any kind of situation to be able to handle something like this. And frankly, I think leaders on both sides recognize this. But public opinion has been harnessed to the point where leaders in both Japan and China feel compelled to take a harder line than they've traditionally done. And the other thing that was previously mentioned is that there's a leadership transition.
We're going to pick up, I'm going to interrupt you on that point, Philip Lipsky.
Sure.
We're going to pick up on that leadership transition question in China when we return. This is the France 24 debate.